Our presentation is about expository analysis. This presentation is by Ethan, Tyler, Reyna, Logan, Aniya, and myself. The purpose of the section is to show that the English language is very complex and lessens the value of all of the different tenses and pieces. The way English language is structured, almost everything is objectified, and therefore it subconsciously affects the way you think. The message of the sections is that the Potawatomi is used for non-binary and it doesn't have much of a hold. The value of its words mean more and it's not complex, versus English can cause frustration and confusion. But the whole point of the language is to help understand or differentiate the nouns.
And from the passage are logos and pathos. We couldn't find an ethos because we're covering expository. So our logos quote from the passage is only 30% of English words are verbs, but in Potawatomi, that portion is 70%. And 70% have different tenses and cases to be mastered. We picked another quote saying, "No wonder there are only 9 speakers left." This really emphasizes how hard it is to learn the language, considering there's like you have to learn so many like phrases and stuff that's it's really different from English and really difficult. And there in the passage it shows that there are only 9 fluent speakers left, like in the world. Our pathos quote from the passage is, "Our teacher tells us not to be discouraged and thanks us every time a word is spoken. Thanks us for breathing life into the language, meaning to appreciate what they still have and that isn't gone. That it isn't gone. Don't focus on what's been taken, but what's still there." Our quote that we chose for pathos is, "I was feeling that this was just way too hard. The threads in my brain knotted, and the harder I tried, the tighter they became." Um, I threw down the book. So this quote really shows how frustrated the speaker is in learning the language, and it refers to our previous quote actually too. Um, that it says, "I was feeling this was way too hard. The threads in my brain knotted, and the harder I tried, the tighter they became." It really, really shows how hard the language is to learn. It shows how um, I'm sorry, how like just how difficult it is, and how it's like it makes sense that there are 9 speakers because anyone who tries to learn the new language, who tries to learn it, even when they're not like fluent, it's just like really difficult for them.
The author uses different diction to express the importance of the Mississippi River. Furthermore, the amount of words and language holds. This is a bit of French for you, and it means comparative tables and figures of heights, of principal mounts, and of course of principal rivers of the world. During this text, it also uses analogies. To actually speak, of course, requires verbs, and here is where my kindergarten proficiency at naming things leaves me. English is a noun-based language, somehow appropriate to a culture so obsessed with things.
Mississippi River's headwater begins in the Great Lake region and travels east to the Appalachian Mountains until it enters the Gulf of Mexico. Along the way, hundreds of smaller streams and rivers feed into it like small tributaries from the Rocky Mountains. Dr. Kimmer could have used the Mississippi River as a point of context when writing this part of the passage from Learning the Language of Animacy, because it demonstrates the reason why English nouns translate to verbs in Potawatomi. Potawatomi uses verbs to represent animate things because the language is describing the subject's current state. For example, all the rivers and streams that feed into the Mississippi River change form and would have a different name at the intersection of that change, from a stream to a river to a gulf to an ocean. By explaining the grammar of Potawatomi, Dr. Kimmer is trying to teach us that all things in nature share the innate ability of people to grow and change, as demonstrated by the Mississippi.
Dr. Kim's remark, it is obvious that the lesson she was trying to convey is that how we interact with others affects how nature normally moves over decades. It is not that animals are able to communicate. Of course, they can communicate. They're always speaking to us. The problem is that we don't pay attention. Listening is essential, aka a major asset, not just for their sake, but also for ours, since there's a limit to how far we may exploit the earth and its natural resources. Knowing about all of the rivers that flow in the Mississippi River is important because it allows for communication, which creates money. Mississippi River, Mississippi River provides drinking water for millions of people and sustains 12.6 billion shipping industries that employs 3.5 to 300,000 people. It is one of the world's most vital rivers, carrying goods and foods all across the world. This demonstrates that without communication in present day, we would not have clean water,